This is a notice for all participants. This is a public meeting and proceedings are being webcast live online. A recording will also be available for playback on the Council's website shortly afterwards. Please note that your name will appear in the live stream and in the recording. Should you not wish for your image to appear on these, please turn off your camera. Third parties should not record or film the local plan hearing sessions, and neither the Council nor the Planning Inspectorate are liable for any third-party recordings. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's 2 o'clock, so time to resume today's session and the hearing sessions as part of the examination of the Tunbridge Wells local plan. Hopefully everybody can see and hear me okay. Welcome back for those of you who are here this morning, and welcome along for those of you joining us for this afternoon session. My name is Matthew Birkinshaw. I'm a Chartered Town Planner and the Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct the examination. This afternoon, we are moving on to talk about some of the transport issues with the plan and the transport issues that I've identified in the matters, issues and questions document. However, before we do so, for those of you who maybe weren't watching or attending this morning's session, we did just about run out of time, and there was one site from this morning's session which we didn't get a chance to go through, and that was land at Showfields Road, which is policy RTW15. And I know that there was 2 participants who were politely hanging on until the end, waiting for their chance, and then we ran out of time. I can't remember your names, apologies, but are you both still there? Did you manage to log back in for this afternoon's session? Was it Miss Sandlin and Miss Stevens? Was it yourselves?
Yeah, I think that was both of us.
Yeah. And are you happy to continue now? I think it probably just makes sense.
Yes, please.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sticking with it. Apologies, we ran over. And let's say thank you for I know that one of you had to rearrange another meeting, so I do apologise for that, but thank you for sticking with it. And it obviously means that we then don't need to resume. So for those of you for this afternoon session on transport, we will be talking about transport and we will be going through that. It's just that the 2 participants from this morning were both available now. So it makes sense if we just spend the next 20 minutes or so finishing off that session. So for those of you who are here for transport and not here for that one, what I'll do, I'll go through this last site. We'll then probably take a quick break, and then I'll start this afternoon's session in the context of the transport issues to go through. So RTW15 then, land at Showfields Road and Rowan Tree Road. So just by way of introduction for the council, please, question for the council. What's the justification for this allocation in the plan? And how do you see the site coming forward?
Good afternoon. Yeah, Sharon Evans on behalf of Tunbridge Wells Borough Council. So the justification for the allocation of this site is set out in the council statement, page 22 to 27 of the council statement. We've provided some background in the statement in relation to this site and the sort of evolution of the allocation, if you like. It was a smaller area was allocated within the Reg 18 version of the local plan, and then a larger area has now been allocated within the Reg 19 local plan. And I think essentially the areas, it's defined as a neighbourhood centre within this location of the town. It was considered through the Sheila process and the sort of types of uses which would be appropriate within that site. Originally, the allocation is for 155 additional dwellings, but the sort of primary sort of focus of the allocation really is for a sort of range of uses, recognising that this area acts very much as a sort of neighbourhood centre. We discussed neighbourhood centres a bit this morning, and it does already provide for residential development, as well as health and community uses on the site. And what we're trying to seek to achieve through the policy is sort of further sort of enhancements, sort of redevelopment opportunities within the site, for a mix of uses. Things have changed slightly in terms of what we know to be coming forward on the site, and the hearing statement does reflect that. And that's essentially in relation to the proposals coming from the Town and Country Housing Group. And we've set that out quite clearly in the statement, and I know obviously they're here today as well. So a planning application has been submitted now to the Borough Council for a redevelopment of the part of the site that's within their ownership. And there's sort of specific reasons for them bringing forward that site at the current time. We had previously, based on information that was available to us, we'd sought to allocate the site for an additional 155 dwellings, but now from sort of subsequent conversations and proposals coming forward, it's clear that it is actually far less than that, and so we're seeking some modifications to the plan to reflect that, which again we've set that out quite clearly.
So just in terms of the sort of various land ownerships then, so the planner submitted sought this continuation of a mix of uses, but for approximately 155 additional dwellings. So how many additional dwellings do you think that the site, and when I say the site, I mean the site that's allocated in the plan, what sort of scale of additional residential development are you expecting to come forward then?
We're sort of proposing to put a figure in now of between 35 and 40 additional dwellings.
And what would happen? So a couple of questions then. So what are the reasons for that change? And what would happen with the rest of the site then? So would it just be additional residential dwellings that you'd be requiring the applicant to provide? What would happen in terms of sort of existing and proposed community uses, other non-residential uses then?
Yeah, I think the site is in a number of different ownerships. We've set that out in the statement at paragraph 74, including Town and Country Housing Group, the number one community trust who own the community uses on the site. There's also ownership by Kent County Council, Tunbridge Wells Borough Council, and some private individuals. So we are acknowledging that in order to bring forward the site comprehensively, there are difficulties involved with that number of ownerships, and so we've sought to make some amendments to the policy in that regard. In terms of the residential uses, Town and Country Housing Group have done some work and consider that because of some of the limitations on the site, that they could deliver it's a net gain of sort of 35 to 40 additional dwellings. There are existing community uses on the site, and again, they're in a number of different ownerships. We've recognised that. We made some amendments in the policy wording in the Reg 19 local plan to just make that a bit clearer at paragraph 5.99. That there's a range of existing community uses and facilities which should be retained and enhanced and form an integral part of any redevelopment. So it's just providing that greater clarity that we would want to we'd want to see those local facilities retained on the site, and if there are opportunities for enhancement and re-provision of some of those uses, then we would support that through this policy. We've also referred to discussions that we've had with the clinical commissioning group in relation to health provision. There was an existing branch surgery at that location which closed in January 2020. It's now being used by County Council as a specialist health clinic. And there has been some work looking at whether, you know, a new GP practice could be provided on the site. Again, you know, there are difficulties because of the sort of number of ownerships and things, but we would like to, you know, keep the policy in terms of the reference to health facilities as something that could be delivered over the plan period, mindful of the discussions we've had with the clinical commissioning group, and they support that policy is in there for the longer term in terms of provision of health uses.
So putting this all together then, in terms of the policy as submitted, I think in your hearing statement you suggested some changes. And this is within the council's hearing statement, but obviously would be sort of subject to full public consultation. And they're obviously recognising that proposals essentially may come forward for either the whole site or parts of the site. In terms of the community facilities, then, what would you be expecting an applicant to provide? So, say for example, a plan application came forward for sort of consolidation of existing residential uses, sort of some new residential uses on there, but it was only for part of the site. What would you be expecting that applicant to do in terms of the community and non-residential uses, especially if they didn't have control over their ownership?
I think it's one of those sites where sort of stakeholder consultation, you know, it's one of those sites where there needs to be discussion between the parties, between a number of stakeholders with sort of interest in that area, to ensure that, you know, existing facilities are retained, or if there are proposals for new community facilities or expanded or enhanced, then that needs to be taken into account and considered. Sort of opportunities for sort of Section 106 funding from any development coming forward towards enhancements to facilities. So I think that there's a range of ways that it could be looked at, but I think, you know, it's one of those areas where, you know, the council's keen to see those community facilities, you know, retained for that local community, and, you know, we'd have to have those discussions as part of, you know, proposals coming forward to see how best to meet those needs.
Because within the wording changes that you've suggested in your hearing statement, it would, and I'll sort of read it out for the benefit of others, it would say that so this would be part A, or one of the policy. It would say that any proposals for the redevelopment of the site or part of the site shall seek to provide the re-provision and enhancement of the existing residential dwellings alongside enhanced and improved community facilities, which may include a new medical centre. Enhancement or re-provision of the existing community facilities will be considered and carried out in cooperation with the relevant stakeholders. So again, it's that sort of word of considered and considering, which I know we've talked about before. I mean, I'm just sort of struggling to understand how that would actually be provided. And I mean, would it be necessary if it was just additional residential development? What would you be requiring applicants to do there? Or actually, are you looking for the comprehensive development? Are you actually looking for a comprehensive approach to this site? You know, tying it all together, working together, master plans, etc.
I think originally we were looking for comprehensive development of the site, but we need to, you know, we do acknowledge that it's in a number of different ownerships and, you know, different interests which are coming forward at different times. So I think, you know, ensuring that comprehensive approach is challenging on a site like this. So I guess what we're trying to do is seek to get, you know, stakeholders and landowners to work together, but acknowledging that elements of the site may come forward, you know, separately. But we don't want to, you know, we don't want them to have detrimental impact on those existing community facilities that are there.
So just turning to that, and then we'll also open up to discussion. Then just in terms of the existing community facilities, then, so how would they be sort of let's say sort of protected or retained, maintained as part of any development proposals then?
They would already have protection via other policies within the local plan, policy ED12, which we've discussed previously as well, which is that's retention of neighbourhood facilities. So there would already be protection of those, you know, of the neighbourhood facilities as part of that policy approach.
Is that referred to anywhere?
No, possibly we that's what it needs is a cross-reference to policy policy ED12. It's referred to in the supporting text. That it's within the neighbourhood centre at paragraph 5.99, but maybe some explicit reference. Yeah, explicit reference within the policy would be helpful. Under the under the policy, yes. Where we've got cross-reference to the various policies, other policies within the plan that would be considered as part of it, we could include it there.
Okay, let's open this up to our two representatives who waited patiently this morning for this site. So any sort of comments on either the plan as submitted in terms of its soundness, or the sort of council's suggested change which was in the hearing statement? We'll go to Catherine Stevens first, please.
Hi, my name is Catherine Stevens. I'm from Frankham Projects, representing the Town and Country Housing Group. Town and Country Housing, our client, has spent probably 18 months to 2 years in pre-app discussions with the council and Kent County Council regarding how this site can be regenerated in the best possible way for the benefit of the estate and the wider community. My client is a provider of affordable housing, and the key objective here is to ensure that there's no loss of affordable housing, no let loss. As Sharon has mentioned, we recently submitted a planning application which has now been validated, and this results in a net gain of 36 new units on the majority of the land within our red line planning application boundary, land within the control of Town and Country, as well as land within the control of the council and Kent County Highways. So in terms of the proposed wording put forward by the council, we agree that the number of new residential units for the allocation should be reduced to around 35 to 40. Turning to the wording regarding the community uses, perhaps there is scope to reference and make stronger the reference to the retention of the community uses, which my client fully supports the community uses and recognises the importance of those community uses to the residents of the estate and also the wider community there. And our planning application, we have spent time discussing this with the Number One Trust and the council, and our planning application retains those community uses as well as the village green, which is an important part of that community neighbourhood centre area. And as Sharon has just suggested, I think a reference to the retention of policy dealing with the retention of the community uses would be helpful in this regard. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Sandlin, please.
Hi, thank you so much for the changes. We appreciate very much the changes that have been put forward by Tunbridge Wells Council. Introduce myself, Susanna Sallon, on behalf of the number 1 Community Trust. I'm working for Evolution Town Planning. So yeah, we do welcome the changes that have been put forward by Tunbridge Wells Borough Council on the policy. I think we agree that 35 to 40 is a much more realistic figure for this site, given that there's no new land actually allocated for housing. We're effectively proposing an intensification here. So I think that change will just and wider community that we're hearing back day to day from them that there is concern locally about the level that was previously provided. So we do welcome that. In terms of the current application that's with Town and Country have put in, we do appreciate there's been consultation on that and are grateful for it. And of course, the Trust will comment on that through that route. Obviously, because such a large area has been allocated, there's potential for future applications to come forward under this, because it's only going to be a comprehensive scheme. There might be other applications come forward. And in terms of the long-term protection of the number 1 Community Trust buildings, which are used all week, every day, 7 days a week, and are valued by the community, we do appreciate policy is at ED12 and the opportunity to cross-reference there. I think the thrust of the concern of the trustees has not so much been the idea of there being a complete loss of the facilities. I think we all welcome and know that there is protection against the long-term plan. It's just more been a concern to ensure that in any application during construction phases, were a re-provision proposal to come forward, that the Trust's groups and facilities could continue in alternative provision or at the same time as new provision being made, so that effectively the Trust's groups that are their essential tenants and are the lifeblood of the community now during construction, and then expected to magically come back 4 years later, or something we've seen elsewhere in Tunbridge Wells. That has not been a successful model. And so in putting forward the changes to the policy, where I think you said there was proposed wording that's going to be the re-provision and enhancement, perhaps putting forward re-provision or enhancement might just enable that to be addressed. And the duty effectively for enhancement applications that may not be for re-provision applications, which could be more disruptive, and in amending the policy to protect the community trusts, buildings and community facilities, maybe a step further than just referencing the other policy, which deals with the loss of community facilities, perhaps just inserting something which protects the existing uses as they are, and ensures some kind of protection during construction would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of comments on the council suggested changes. I think where you've suggested a change to the enhancement or re-provision of the existing community facilities will be considered and carried out in cooperation with relevant stakeholders. It's probably a bit too loose, that wording, I think, to be effective. I think what the policy could do is make it explicit, and I probably agree with the last speaker that it could be explicit in its requirements for accordance with ED12. And then just thinking out loud, what you could do is refer to, in the event that development proposals redevelops any of these community buildings and there would be re-provision on site, that the details would be agreed through some sort of phasing and implementation plan that would again just tie it all together and would require the applicant at that stage to say, this is what we're going to do, and yes, there'll be some potential disruption during construction works, etc., but this is what we're going to do to sort of mitigate those effects and sort of manage the process, really. So I think with the council, I don't know what your views are on that, but I think that would just tighten up the wording around considering something with the relevant stakeholders, probably needs to go a bit further. Explicit reference to ED12, and then also just a requirement to cover that issue of just a simple sort of agreement of a sort of phasing and implementation strategy or something like that, which would probably be potentially sort of conditioned or put into a legal agreement anyway, potentially.
Yep, noted. Yep.
Yeah. Ms. Stevens.
Hi, thank you, sir. I just wanted to draw your attention to paragraph 2.8 of our statement, where it shows an ownership plan, and you will see that a significant number of homes on this estate have actually been bought under the right to buy scheme, and it's highly unlikely that our client or the council using ZPO powers would want to acquire these right to buy properties, and therefore the whole scale regeneration of this wide area which is allocated is highly unlikely to occur. Just another point I'd like to make is that the reduction in the number of units was mainly due to discussions regarding car parking. Car parking is a major constraint on the estate. At the moment, car parking is unallocated across the estate, and it's been very important to try and reduce some of the instances where people are parking indiscriminately and dangerously, and ensure that there is sufficient parking for existing residential units as well as proposed residential units. And there's been a lot of discussion with the council and Kent County Council to ensure that the number of units proposed meets the requirements in terms of parking provision. And finally, I just wondered whether the policy is worded to reflect the fact that there could be several different applications that come in. Obviously, Town and Country's application focuses on housing and providing other regenerative benefits in terms of public realm and landscaping, that any changes to those community buildings are likely to form part of a separate planning application. Thank you.
Yeah, and let's say where you look at the wording, sort of tightening it up around the potential impacts on community, you could use words such, sort of applicable or where relevant to recognise the fact that yes, that there may be actually sort of smaller applications coming forward, and clearly parts of the policy would sort of be applicable to those as required. Okay, anything else? No, but I agree. Sort of, main changes there that we talked about there, and sort of, making it more explicit in its requirements in line with ED12, and then sort of tying some wording in together to sort of consider phasing implementation where relevant for the relevant applications. Anything else from Ms. Stevens or Ms. Sandlin? Ms. Sandlin.
So it's just one other thing that we did briefly touch on earlier, the opportunity for Section 106 contributions, that obviously that would be hugely welcome to the Trust, who do a fantastic job providing on the estate. So if there was not to be a comprehensive scheme brought forward, whether the policy can provide for some provision to be made directly to the number one trust, obviously by the council, to enable them to enhance and renovate the provision that they have down there. Whether there's scope to do that specifically, I don't know, but that might be helpful.
I think that would be a consideration of an individual plan application rather than explicitly putting it into the policy itself. Obviously, any financial contributions would have to meet the relevant tests. So it's difficult with policies because you're not considering a specific plan application. So I don't think it'd be right to just say. I know there's a sort of broad catch-all. I think at the end of every policy, which I think is just intended to sort of refer more broadly to. Well, it could be anything. It could be we'll talk about this afternoon about highways and offsite highway works, etc. But I don't think for soundness the policy would need to refer to specific contributions.
Bullet point 5 is that, as you said, that catch-all in criteria there, referring to policy STRRTW1.
Yeah. And again, it would be for each scheme to demonstrate its sort of compliance with the relevant regulations for financial contributions.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Nope. Anything else from the council just on that last allocation?
No, nothing further from us. Okay,
excellent. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for sticking with that. And apologies again for the slight overrun and for those participants this afternoon as well. What I propose, because I've still got all my notes out from this morning's session, what I'll propose we'll do is we'll take a little break now. That will allow obviously the participants from this morning to leave if they so wish, and also just for me to get my relevant notes together for this afternoon's session. So we'll take a break if we may, and we'll take an adjournment, just sort of 15 minutes or so, and we will resume at 2:45 then, please, and that's when we'll get into this afternoon's session proper. Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks everybody. It's 1:45, so we will resume and continue. First of all, thank you for that. I appreciate obviously that people have attended this afternoon's session for the transport matters. Like I said before, we ran slightly over this morning, and it made sense rather than dragging people back for a separate session to just continue that session and get through that final site. So we're back on track and back on topic for this afternoon then. Notice there's some new names around the sort of virtual table, so I'll very quickly introduce myself again and the sort of topic and nature of the discussion this afternoon. So my name is Matthew Birkinshaw, Chartered Town Planner and the Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to hold the examination of the Tunbridge Wells Borough Local Plan. For those of you who haven't attended any of the previous sessions thus far, I know that several of you probably will have done. We're into the last week of the examination now, so we've been obviously going through all the issues and going through all the policies. This afternoon, we're moving on to look at some of the transport issues that have been identified and some of the policies surrounding transport matters. There's no agenda for this afternoon. So what we'll do, we'll go through the matters, issues and questions document, which we have been doing, and which obviously you sort of saw me go through there with the council with that last sort of community and mixed use site. So we'll go through the matters, issues and questions. If anybody would like to participate, and I do actively encourage people to obviously take part in the hearing, then as you saw then, just use the raise hand function within Zoom. I can then see that you'd like to speak. If it's the first time that you've spoken or you haven't attended any of the previous sessions or didn't attend this morning, if you could just introduce yourself when you do first speak, let me know who you are. If you're acting on behalf of a particular landowner or client or particular site, that'd be much appreciated. And yes, please do use this opportunity. This is opportunity to put your points forward. And to make representations around some of the transport issues which we're here to discuss this afternoon. So please do participate in the debate and the discussion, but please do also stick to the points that you've raised in your representations. So it's not an opportunity to maybe speak about policies or issues that you've not raised previously, but where you have, please do get involved. Any questions from the council before we get going with this afternoon?
No, sir, but I think I ought to just draw your attention to the fact that we have just now agreed a statement of common ground with National Highways. It deals with all issues of strategic relevance to them. Frustrating that it must be for you to have it at this late stage. I don't cast any blame or aspersions. I understand it must be frustrating to have it so late, but we have it nonetheless. It refers to a couple of additional technical papers to bring evidence up to date in relation to the issue of the Kippings Cross roundabout and the options analysis which relate to that. That's partly strategic in significance and partly local. But if I can just sum it up this way, that it seems that National Highways are absolutely content that the plan deals adequately with the issues that concern them. We haven't yet put it up on the website. We're waiting. Well, it's only just occurred, so we're in your hands as to whether it goes onto the website, the examination webpage today.
You mentioned there that it referred to a couple of technical reports. What are they, and is the evidence that it refers to evidence that's previously been made available, or evidence that hasn't been made available?
So my instructions are that it's new insofar as it relates to Kippings Cross. I'm not sure if it's new in the sense that it updates or is new material. Just bear with me, sir. Yeah, why not? So just bear with me for a second.
Yeah, I'm trying to start my video. Okay. Good afternoon, I'm Louise Gordon. I'm Principal Transport and Development Planner for Kent County Council, the Highway Authority. And just wanted to clarify the position with regard to the latest information on Kippings Cross, in that the latest information that was provided in June, it provides additional, it clarifies the mitigating options that we wish to take forward, which would be works to the B2160 on the approach to the Kippings Cross roundabout, and the works would reduce the capacity of that link so that it reduces the amount of traffic entering onto the roundabout to such an extent that the result is that the roundabout would operate within capacity, and National Highways are satisfied with that approach.
So my instructions are the supporting evidence, actually, or to which I've referred, and to which reference is made in the Statement of Common Ground, relates to the work in relation to that junction, and what can be undertaken in order to, as it were, on a technical level, to achieve the capacity required. Those technical studies are also available to go onto the website.
Okay, well, there's a question later on, isn't there, about specifically about this roundabout. Obviously, this is again something I've not seen. It's something that participants haven't seen either. So I can't really offer any suggestions on the way forward, other than you'd have to send it to me through the programme officer, and I'll have to have a look at this and sort of make a decision thereafter about what goes forward. Clearly, if it's relevant and pertinent to the examination, then yes, then it needs to be made available, but also does sort of bring into questions about whether or not it needs to be consulted on at this stage.
I perfectly understand that, sir, and that's why I raised it first thing with you in the beginning of this session. And again, I apologise it's late. There's nothing we could do about that, but I'm hoping that once you see it, you'll be able to make a decision about whether it's pertinent or not to the issues which are raised and the issues which you're considering. And if so, then we'll do our utmost to make sure it's up as soon as possible. So you can make a decision as to how it should be dealt with for future purposes, so that objectors are not prejudiced by its lateness. Yeah.
Just on the procedural point, rather than getting into any detail at this stage, then see some hands have gone up. So obviously, the council obviously referred to a new statement of common ground with National Highways, and some sort of evidence that sits behind it. In summary, I've not seen it, nor has anybody else. So we need to obviously make sure that that's sent to me in the first instance, but then also, in the interest of fairness, that others are afforded an opportunity to review this information as well. But just on the procedural elements of this, then we'll take some views. Go to Charlie Keeling, we can.
Thank you, sir. I'm a member of the Save Capel Executive, and what you've just seen is a recurring theme. The National Highways SOCG about Kippings Cross to Lamberhurst, in the scheme of things, I don't think it's that important. I think we all know that is not going to happen in terms of a widening of the road. It's great to hear that the roundabout is going to have its capacity increased, but this is just typical of the process that we've been going through since the plan was submitted on the 1st of November last year. Funnily enough, well, you'll remember, sir, on the 29th of March, we had an extra day's hearing to cover some points that have been left outstanding from stage 1. And miraculously at 7:45 p.m. on the 28th, we suddenly get a statement of common ground from Kent County Council. Surely that statement of common ground, this statement of common ground, should have been submitted when the plan was submitted on the 1st of November 2021. Now, we all understand, I believe, that things change. And if we look at the government at the moment, we can totally get that. The problem for me and for Save Capel is we'd have expected the transport strategy to be much more clearly defined than it has been. Detail may have followed, but as with several other matters, we're into SDB timescales now, and quite frankly, it's not good enough. I'll just make a few other small points, sir, generally about this matter. The landowners for the 5 Oak Green bypass. Funnily enough, or maybe not funnily enough, 2 days ago we learnt that one of the landowners on the 5 Oak Green bypass is actually putting in a planning application to build a solar farm on the land where his current hop farm is, one of the last hop farms in Kent. And therefore, I would suggest a compulsory purchase order process, if that was to carry on, would be much more difficult now that that planning application has gone in. And probably one of our biggest issues is we all know the infrastructure is inadequate today and needs significant mitigation. But what about during the construction phase? All of those heavy lorries, machine, articulates, whatever, are going to invade what are already inadequate roads until construction and development is how far through? We don't know. So then there's the issue of funding, which looks as if it's now being plonked on the developers. And I'd love to know how many developers have signed up to volunteer to fund. So I'm sorry, sir, you know, this whole transport issue has been badly managed by the Borough Council. In terms of duty to cooperate, we know that Tunbridge and Malling still have serious concerns. In Paddock Wood and East Capel, and I see Ms. Riley from Paddock Wood Town Council has got her hand up as well. You know, the master planning exercise was a tick box at best, and how you can build a transport strategy around a tick box exercise, I don't know. And as far as the Tudley Village master plan is concerned, we're still waiting to see what that really looks like. So sorry for the rant. I'll pass over now. I do have a colleague, Mr. McMurtry, from our transport consultants, who may be able to provide more detail if that's necessary. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, let's not get dragged into any of the site specifics at the moment. Obviously, we've had sessions on Tudor Village, we've had sessions on Paddock Wood, but let's just stick with this procedural issue then. It's obviously it's something I've not seen. As I said, sounds to the council. I need to see it. I then need to make a decision on how it's best sort of distributed and commented upon. I can't really give the answer until I've seen it. But go to Mr. Brown from National Highways, please.
Good afternoon, sir. Kevin Bown, BOWN from National Highways. Hopefully the latest version of the SOCG is simply a minor evolution rather than something very new. Previous SOCGs were written up many months ago. I'm afraid I haven't been had the pleasure of joining the examination before, but I had assumed that earlier versions had been submitted. So you would have seen the work in progress, and this latest iteration is just a reflection of the conclusion of a fairly minor piece of work to conclude the assessment of the impacts on one junction at Kippings Cross and agreement with regards to how that might best be mitigated. So hopefully there will be no great surprises in the SOCG to you or to other parties. They won't have been fettered in their ability to participate in the examination. Thank you, sir.
Ms. Riley?
Yeah, I'll echo what the traffic code said generally about this, but it's about the B21 runs up to Kippings Cross. That's the main route out of Paddock Wood, Colts Hill, and obviously you've got the positive development happening. And if they're going to do the bypass works on Colts Hill, then all the traffic's going to come up there. And I'm a little bit concerned that the officer, the lady, I didn't catch her name, I'm sorry, from KCC Highway, they come on reducing the usage of the B2160 possible, because all the construction that runs down to Paddock Wood, that's the route it takes from the A21 out. The other thing I say is that unless I might be totally wrong about this, I'm pretty certain I'm not. This is, as far as I know, the first statement of common ground from KC Highways with Tunbridge Wells. Unless there's some more in the documents that I haven't seen, this is the first one, so it's not a minor alteration. As far as I can see, it's the first statement of common ground that's been issued. So anyway, just obviously you'll have to look at the statement of common ground, look at the maps and see how relevant you think it is. But I protested the late submission, and as far as I'm aware, this is the first statement of common ground from Highways. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Georgie Warner next, please. Again, just on the sort of procedural elements of this, please.
Good afternoon, sir. Georgie Warner and Christine Churchill, representing Brentford and Matfield Parish Council. There appear to be no mitigation proposals at all that have been provided in our parish. We have the B2160 going straight through Matfield, and already at times it's difficult to find a safe moment to cross the Maidstone Road in the centre of Matfield. Traffic queues as soon as the A21 becomes blocked. People are finding rat runs running through our rural lanes, getting off the A21, severely impacting residents' quality of life, as well as damaging historic routeways, which are an important feature of the high-wheeled AONB. We really are concerned about rush hour traffic tailbacks on the A21. I'm not quite sure how highways will mitigate this sort of problem. You can't get out of the B2160 onto the A21 in the morning. We just feel that there's been it's been totally inadequate mitigation proposals put forward. All the new building in Paddock Wood is going to make such a difference, and the proposed developments and all the proposed allocations that have already been given planning permission. There's no traffic calming measures, pedestrian crossings. They're all required in both villages. We are deeply concerned as a parish council. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. As I said before, send it through. I'll look at it and advise on the sort of best way forward with this additional information. But obviously, send through, if it does refer to documents, send those documents with it. So it's a sort of one package.
Will do.
Okay, we'll look at some of these issues. As I said, we've touched because Paddock Wood and because Tudley Village, a sort of key part of those sessions, which I identified in the agendas, were on transports and traffic and highways. We've actually discussed sort of quite a lot of those issues already. So we don't necessarily need to sort of go through all those issues. So we did have specific sessions on those, and I am well aware of the issues and well aware of the representations that have been made in that regard. But we'll go through the masses issues and questions, and it may be that we can, because of what we know so far and because of what we have talked about so far, we'll probably group some of these together and look at some of the strategic matters. So in terms of the technical highways evidence, then we know the history. We know obviously that there's reference to various reports that council have that have done. One question I did still have that was outstanding from the strategic sites day, we got in March, and the gentleman referred to it just earlier. We got in March the updated statement of common ground with Kent County Council, and that referred to the transport assessment addendum report, and that was entitled the Addendum 2 report. And it's a point that people have made at these hearings, and we know that the addendum report was produced. We know why it was produced, and we've talked about that. Why was that an Addendum 2 report? Because there's been suggestion of, obviously, where was the Addendum 1 report? So just for my notes then, was the first addendum published, and is that part of the suite of documents?
Good afternoon, sir. Steve Bourne, former head of planning at Tunbridge Wells Council, today representing the Borough Council. So the first addendum reports hasn't been uploaded to the council's website. It has been provided where it has been requested. I believe Save Capel specifically requested a copy of it. The reason, sir, why it hasn't been uploaded to the website is it was an iteration. It was superseded in its entirety by the Addendum 2 report. That reflects the iterative working which has been undertaken throughout the plan making process between the council and the highways authorities, and the statement of common ground with Kent County Council sets out the first addendum report was superseded by the Addendum 2, and that's why that was uploaded to the website. But as I say, sir, Save Capel requested the addendum report, the Addendum 1, for want of a better word, and that was provided to them on request.
So as far as the examination is concerned, then, as far as the council's position is, the Addendum 2 reports, that was the October 2021 report, which is post-submission document 23, I think it was rebadged as. So that is the most relevant and up-to-date report. There was a first addendum iteration produced, but it's been entirely superseded by PS 023, the October 2021 report. Therefore, that's why that's been submitted, and the other one presumably therefore isn't relevant because it's been entirely superseded by this one. Yeah. Okay, and we know that the Addendum 2 report, we talked about this previously in the context of Tudor Village and Paddock Wood. We know why that was produced, and we know that it's obviously referred to the methodology that it has done. And we talked on the Tudor Village Day. There was a gentleman from Tunbridge and Malling Borough Council, and we talked about the scope of that evidence and what it looked at, etc., etc. One of the sort of, I'll call it a reoccurring theme, but it's a theme that has sort of cropped up, and it's cropped up in a lot of representations, and we've talked about this before, but mindful as people at this session may not have been at others, is whether or not the plan in terms of the policies is sufficiently clear in terms of highways mitigation, is sufficiently clear as to what will be provided when and where. So it's probably worthwhile I know it might be a slight repetition, but it's probably worthwhile just going over that, because we talked about the IDP, and we talked about the strategic sites master planning work, and I think we came to some agreement in the end that, obviously, subject to all of the things being considered, and obviously me going to look at these sites is the first part of that. But subject to all of that, I think there was a general consensus that perhaps the plan in terms of the strategic sites does need to be clearer as to what's going to be provided for each of these sites, and how that's going to be controlled, really. So do you think then, as a council, subject to changing the policies to make it abundantly clear what will be provided, and sort of tying it together as part of a sort of phasing and implementation plan, that the plan will be not only effective, but will ensure that the necessary mitigation is provided at the right time?
Yes, sir. Unfortunately, it does depend upon modifying the policies to strategic policies principally, in order to ensure that the policies are sufficiently effective at development management stage. One has to be careful about being too prescriptive about when and what infrastructure is required at any particular time. And I say that for good planning reasons. We are at this stage at plan making stage. We know what the key items of infrastructure are. We know roughly when they ought to be delivered in order to make these proposed communities sustainable, but at the same time provide sufficient mitigation to avoid off-site effects which are unacceptable or undesirable. And I'm going to call it the IDP, Infrastructure Delivery Plan for short, identifies what those key components are. We've already identified the fact that some of the key highways components actually are shared between them, not just related to one or the other. And so that needs to be reflected in the policies. So what's important is that at the time of the determination of an application, that the up-to-date evidence is taken into account in order for the permission, when it's granted, to be appropriately conditioned and subject, so far as reasonable and necessary, to appropriate Section 106 obligations and restrictions. And they could be restrictions on occupation of the development. And so the policy will be modified to take into account those kinds of requirements, listing the infrastructure both on and off site that would be necessary, but making it clear that any permission will have to take into account and be conditioned and the subject of obligations to ensure that development is delivered in a sustainable way and is appropriately supported by infrastructure both on and off site. And at the moment, the policies don't do that. The evidence base is there, but the policies as drafted don't do that, as we'll discuss, because they defer everything to the council's own supplementary planning documents, which we know are not policy documents. At the end of the day, the policies will be modified to provide every security both the public and the local authority need to ensure that these developments come forward in a sustainable manner and supported by the appropriate infrastructure at each stage. There are examples of policies where those provisions are brought into play for major allocations, strategic allocations, in recent plan. So in a sense that wherever in England there are proposals for major strategic allocations, particularly greenfield allocations, there are problems which are not identical but raise similar issues, and therefore the policy structure is very important, but there are precedents, plenty of them, in order to be confident that the modifications will provide a workable and working policy.
Okay, thank you. We've talked a lot at this examination about the two strategic sites, and you know, quite rightly so. They are the largest sites within the plan, at Tudor Village and growth around Paddock Wood. The lady that spoke previously, I think it was Ms. Warner, was talking about obviously wider potential impacts, and obviously, you know, Matfield being one of them, and the sort of potential wider sort of vehicle movements, you know, on the wider surrounding highway network. The evidence then that underpins the local plan in terms of the sort of transport assessment addendums, etc. How far did that look at in terms of its analysis then on traffic movements? Did it just look at obviously the sort of key routes that we've talked around, the sort of, you know, the A228, you know, Colts Hill routes from Tudor Village into Tunbridge, for example, which we've talked about extensively at this examination? What did the evidence do in terms of other impacts then, you know, using your sort of Matfield, Brenchley as an example, you know, other smaller villages where, you know, presumably there would be some vehicle movements, you know, looking to sort of use these sort of more rural lanes to access, you know, other roads, for example, heading south onto the A21. What did the evidence do, or was it just really purely looking at sort of key junctions arising from the strategic sites, or did it look at the borough more widely?
So if I'll start, and then I will refer to colleagues to elaborate on particular elements. So you'll have seen in the responses to question 1 the overall or the iterative approach again that the council has taken. So that's in terms of understanding the throughout the plan making process. So through understanding the existing strategies, the existing broader evidence which was in place at the beginning of the plan period, to then again working with duty to cooperate partners, and as part of that, I think there's in particular, and this is reflected in the statement of common ground, has been the work with Kent County Council. The Kent County Council, as the local highways authority, has a very clear understanding of the where there are particular issues or potential issues, both within the areas around Paddock Wood and Chudley going into Tunbridge, but within Royal Tunbridge Wells, Southborough, Hawkhurst as a village as well. And you'll have seen references there in the local plan and elsewhere to the situation in relation to the crossroads at the Highgate part of Hawkhurst. So the response to question 1 sets out, and indeed the statements of common ground sets out that work which has been undertaken between the borough and the county on those various issues and wider areas of the plan, of the borough. Then to sort of drill back to the specific questions about the impact on or from developments and on the wider borough. There's been specific analysis in terms of the impact on junctions along the strategic road network, i.e. the A21, not just in the vicinity of Tunbridge Wells, Tunbridge and Kippings Cross, but further on as one moves down the A21 to the junctions there and the considerations of growth at from Hawkhurst and from Cranbrook, for example, and so through the workshops which have been held with the county. The modelling itself did focus on the western part of the borough, so around Paddock Wood into Tunbridge, but importantly including Royal Tunbridge Wells and Southborough as well. And at this point, I will pass across to colleagues from the County Council as the local highways authority to provide further commentary. Thank you.
Hello again, Louise Gordon, Kent County Council Highways, and I just wanted to confirm that the modelling for the local plan growth was completed using a industry standard Saturn model, and so that local plan growth could be distributed throughout the whole of the borough. Growth from outside the borough was included, and that model was validated and calibrated and found to be sound by both KCC and National Highways, both highway authorities. We do understand the concerns raised by representatives from villages such as Matfield and Brenchley, together with other villages, you know, in these areas, which are already experiencing concerns with regard to traffic flows, speeds, and so this is an ideal opportunity to implement a strategic traffic management study, which would look at and address the issues of the traffic diverting to the A21 through these villages, because in actual fact what is more desirable is for the traffic from these strategic sites and existing running traffic to route towards the A21 via the primary route, which is the A228. So we will be looking at measures, if this plan is approved, to address this existing problem, and we would look to engage with the representatives from these villages, and I'm thinking minimum of Matfield, Horsmondon, Brenchley and Pembury, so that we can talk to them about existing issues and prevent future issues from occurring. Thank you.
So was that done then as part of the evidence base supporting the plans? How have these issues been looked at? So, you know, taking Paddock Wood as a sort of case study, you know, you've got a large amount of growth there within the various sites, and obviously the point that representatives has made is that, you know, people heading south to the A21 will just go through, you know, through these villages. You know, Matfield being an example down to the junction there. So have you modelled the sort of impacts on you know the junction there with the A21, but also just on the sort of highway more generally within, you know, potential for increased vehicle movements?
Yes, shall I address this one? Thank you. So yes, in the draft local plan, submitted local plan, the implementation of traffic calming, speed restrictions is mentioned, and it's mentioned at a high level. And so what we've done is we've refined that work. So I mentioned about a most recent technical note dated June, which was looking at refining options for Kippings Cross. Well, there had already been previous technical notes. So there was the transport assessment, and then the transport assessment addendum. Then there was a technical note in May. And so it has been work in progress. So we always had the intention to address the traffic issues through these villages. It was always our intention, but we've been working with colleagues at Tunbridge Wells and with their consultants to to get those options clearer and in more detail. And so the most recent technical note, which is the one I referred to earlier, dated 23rd of June, that addresses the mitigation for Kippin's Cross, but it also suggests, and this mitigation for Kippin's Cross is an option to bring forward, but it also includes an option to undertake a strategic traffic management exercise to address the issues of running traffic routing through the villages that I mentioned, and to bring forward measures such as traffic calming, traffic regulation orders to improve the quality of life and to improve air quality, and to reduce the number of traffic movements, including HGVs, through those villages, because at the end of the day, we would far prefer that traffic to route via the A228, a primary route, than through those villages which perhaps don't have street lighting, perhaps the paths aren't as wide, or they don't have cycle routes. So we want the traffic to route on the more favourable A228.
Mr. Bourne.
Thank you, sir. So the council's view is that in accordance with the PPG, the evidence base underpinning the local plan in transport terms is proportionate to the stage, to the local plan stage. There are requirements in the various policies that mitigations will be delivered. Those will be refined. The further detailing, for example, in relation to a particular more localized issues, so around the exact positioning of traffic calming, etc., would be dealt with at planning application stage. The evidence base looks at the overall capacity and the key junctions, and has identified those where, and has demonstrated that those mitigations can be delivered. It will be at planning application stage, as always, with the preparation and submission of a transport assessment for those individual sites, which will have to have regard to cumulative development as well, that the very specific mitigations will be designed and will be ensured that they can be delivered through a grant of planning permission and the associated controls that there are through that.
So using Matfield as the example then, so the evidence, which was the initial question I asked, did the evidence consider this issue then? So did the evidence that underpins the plan consider the issue that traffic from growth around Paddock Wood would, for those people wanting to head south, essentially sort of head south through Matfield down to Kippin's Cross to get onto the A21? Did it consider that?
Yes, sir. So the model, the Saturn model, and I will probably ask for further detail from my colleagues here who prepared the model. But yes, sir, the model, and it's shown that the extent of the model is shown in the evidence in the transport assessments for the local plan. That looked at the growth as a result of the local plan. It mapped the impacts that would have and identified key mitigations proportionate to the local plan stage. And again, this is where I'm not a highways or transport expert, so I'll be asking for colleagues to provide further detail on this. But the work that was undertaken subsequently, the sensitivity testing, was based on TRICS data. So looked at the amounts per development to again, provide the confidence to the county and national highways that the Tempro growth, which had been used on the original assessments, was robust. And again, so the council's position is that the original transport assessments was robust. It was asked for it to be sensitivity tested using a different growth, a way of looking at growth. It has done that, and that corroborated the initial study. And I'll pass across to colleagues here who can perhaps provide a little more technical detail on the nature of the Saturn model.
Well, yeah, let's not get dragged into that. In terms of the sort of headline effectiveness of the plan then, so what you're telling me is that you considered, so in answer to my question, did you consider this as an issue, paddock wood growth through Matfield to the A21, for example? I think you said yes, you did. Does that Saturn model then, and does that transport assessment then identify mitigation that would be needed, in locations such as, the B2160, is it onto the A21, through Pembrey, for example? Does that work identify wider transport mitigation that would be necessary? And the second part to that question is, if it does, is that then translated into the plan?
Good afternoon, everybody. Lorna Parsons from SWECO, assisting Tunbridge Wells with the strategic modelling. Just to reiterate what Stephen was saying, that the model has, the nature of the model is such that it chooses routing throughout the whole of the study area. So if we're looking at the distribution from the strategic sites, for example, it takes into account existing travel patterns and capacity of the road network, and it assigns trips throughout that network. So the iterative approach that we've taken with the analysis looked at the existing reference case, so the existing highway network as it stands, the impacts that the growth would have on that, and through that process then identified a number of mitigation, a number of hotspots throughout the network in terms of junctions and also links where the local plan growth would require mitigation in order to incorporate improve the existing situation and mitigate severe impacts. And moving along, in terms of Paddock Wood and the route south to the A21, as an example, the focus of the mitigation has always been to improve the A228 corridor as the primary route within that part of Tunbridge Wells. So the mitigation that was set out within both the Reg 19 report and subsequently the October 21 sensitivity tests included a number of mitigation options, both in terms of physical works to junctions throughout the network, but also undertook a holistic approach which considered the need for modal shift away from traffic and away from cars. So it's a combination of measures, both in terms of sustainable transport improvements, for example, buses, and also physical highway works. And it's the combination of those that would have the greatest impact in terms of routing, for example, through the B2160. So whilst we will increase traffic along particular routes, the extent of the mitigation proposed, which is set out in detail within Appendix E of the October 21 report, and the work that has already been discussed in relation to the A21 Kippings Cross reinforces the need to distribute and redistribute the traffic to the strategic road network, and that's been the focus of the mitigation within the local plan transport strategy.
Okay, let's take some views on this. We'll go to Georgia Warner first.
Hello, it's Christine Churchill, Parish Councillor for Brenchley and Matfield. Thank you for those comments. First of all, using buses, Kent County Council has recently cut buses and we will have no buses in our villages. So using buses as an option isn't an option to take cars off the road. We've had no consultation as regards traffic management and traffic through the village. And we can only say that the HGV and amount of traffic coming through Brenchley and Matfield has increased 3 or 4 times over. We have one particular traffic survey, 26,000 cars going in one direction in a week, 31,000 coming off the A21 through our villages at speeds way above 30 miles an hour. HGVs are being diverted through Brenchley and Matfield. They are not using the A228. They are coming through because they know they can do that, get away with it, and cutting through the villages where ancient buildings, etc., and roadways are being destroyed. They shouldn't be coming through our villages. They should be carrying on the A21, and there's not a lot that's being done about that. And that's what I want to say. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got motion consultants, I think, with their hand up.
Hi there, good afternoon. My name's David, I'm from Motion Consultants. We're here representing Save Capel. I haven't personally attended this hearing. My colleague John Russell has in the past. So I apologise if I repeat anything that's already been discussed, but I'd like to just cover a few elements at a fairly high level, just to reiterate some of our concerns ultimately. With issue 1, the effects of local plan growth. I know some of these points have been discussed today. A number of these, the 4 questions under issue 1 interlink. Have transport issues been covered at an earlier stage? I know, again, some conversation has been had today, but our view is very much that the transport matters have not been discussed in an early enough stage, and that some substantial alterations have taken place in terms of the actual transport evidence from the early stages of submission through to what we have today, particularly in relation to the addendum reports that have been produced. I know there was mention of the original transport assessment being robust, and I'm certainly not disputing content of that report, but the figures that have been produced, particularly in relation to traffic flow figures, have changed fundamentally since the original TA was produced to the point at which the Statement of Common Ground was agreed in March of this year. And that's presumably due to alterations in growth and other factors, but ultimately what has materialised is a fundamental change in the evidence base and that traffic assessment work, which brings into question why that change has materialised and why and whether that should really be a discussion at this stage as part of the examination. Why was the evidence not in a suitable enough state that Kent County Council could produce their Statement of Common Grounds prior to the examination commencing? Linking into wider points within issue 1 in terms of whether the mitigation can be delivered and how will the necessary mitigation be delivered, we have fundamental concerns with the lack of real substance in respect of mitigation packages to deter people away from their private car. The package of mitigation, particularly in relation to bus movements, seems to be lacking in real detail. There's talk of minibus improvements, but nothing to really substantiate the supposed 15% reduction or increase in public transport usage. That does give us some real concern. Leading on from that, issue 4, I'll just link into this briefly if you don't mind, because I think that does link into issue 1, safeguarding infrastructure and the ability to need for the improvement measures such as the 5 Oak Green bypass linking into Colts Hill and the ability to deliver those improvements. And there seems to us to be some real shortfalls in the ability to provide those link roads, which we consider to be essential to any development coming forward. They are a necessary infrastructure to alleviate the additional traffic flow generated. But there appear to be some real environmental concerns to delivering the essential necessary highway infrastructure mitigation. as well as third-party land, which questions the ability to bring that forward. And my colleague Charlie from Save Capel mentioned that earlier in terms of third-party land and the ability to actually secure that land to deliver the necessary highway improvements. I've realised I've rushed through that at a fairly high level, but I think our concern really is that whether or not this mitigation can be effectively delivered and give you enough confidence that it can be to enable this to really go forward. And I understand that detailed applications will come forward at a later date for each individual site where further detailed consideration will be given. But at this stage, we need to have assurance and confidence that that detail can actually be delivered and is actually viable and possible. And that's a high level overview at this stage. It may be that I need to chip in later on with further comments as we progress through the discussion. But
yeah, we don't. Yes. Thank you. We did discuss at length on the Tudor Village Day with your colleague a lot of this. We won't get dragged into the detail of the sort of deliverability of obviously the bypass and who's going to deliver it and when. We did talking some quite detailed length about that. Ms. Borland.
Thank you, sir. So I get my video working, not that you can see me that well. I'm representing CPRE Kent, and we absolutely support the points made by Brenchley and Matfield Parish Council. It's all very well talking about the junctions and mitigating the effect on the A21. These are rural roads that are going through the villages and going between the villages. They're not suitable for cycling along. They're definitely not suitable for walking along. As I said, there are no buses. They're not actually very suitable for driving along a lot of the time. It's not very pleasant to have to pull over to get an HGV by. There has to be something done for the people who are living in the villages and around. It's not all about making it easier to get onto the A21 and making it better on the A21. It's actually for the people who live in the rural areas whose lives are being, I wouldn't say ruined, but are being very, very disrupted, who are concerned about their children walking through the village on their own. And the roadways are not suitable for the level of traffic they're getting at the moment. So changing the junction at the A21 is not going to solve the problem. Building the A228, increasing the capacity of that, I haven't seen anything in the plan which has got the nudge to make people use that. Somebody in a car will go by what they believe is going to be the quickest route to get to where they want. And if that happens to be through a rural lane, through a village, they will do that rather than driving further to get to the A228. And that will continue to be the case that affects Brenchley and Matfield. Thank you, sir.
Yes, using that as a case study, obviously appreciate what the council is saying about trying to get people to use the A228, the A21. How is it envisaged that this sort of council will actually achieve this then? And secondly, if it's required and if it's necessary as mitigation, is this something that can actually be achieved then?
So again, I'll start, and colleagues may interject and assist as well. So in broad terms, Ms. Parsons has outlined the overall approach in terms of mitigation, taking Paddock Wood as the example, in terms of seeking to encourage the use of the A228 rather than the more localised roads. I think it's important to look at. Remember, this is being looked at in relation to the other package of transport measures. And again, I won't go into the detail of that or go over again what was discussed on the strategic site stays, but in relation to public transports and in relation to walking and cycling. And there is obviously the detailed LC WIP work, which includes interurban routes as well, which has audited and looks at appropriate cycling links between the settlements. So the overall approach is to encourage the use of the A228 to then provide that access onto the strategic road network where relevant, or indeed the major road network to provide routes to the adjacent settlements. The key areas of mitigation are set out in the transport assessments and in the again have been looked at through the sensitivity work which was undertaken. The second report, not the addendum 2, but the report which was produced in early 22 indicates that all of those mitigations, particularly around the junctions and so on, can be delivered in the main, with the exception of one site in Tunbridge Wells. They can be delivered on highways land, and there has been that detailed level of rigour to ensure that those mitigations are deliverable on highways land. Elsewhere, if there are more nuanced, more localised mitigations required, again, they will be drawn out through the planning application, through the development management stage, and again through the close working which is set out in the Statement of Common Ground. The council will work with the county council to ensure that those can be delivered within highways land where relevant. The final points before I ask if there's colleagues from the county who wish to add anything to that, is that the council has set out a monitor and manage approach for highways mitigations, understanding that traffic flows may well vary over the course of the local plan, and again that's enshrined in the Statements of Common Ground. The council believes that it has undertaken a proportionate assessment of the impacts using models and 2 models, so using Tempro and Trix, which have been verified by both KCC and National Highways. They've been looked at in detail. The mitigations have been looked at in detail, and both authorities consider that they are the mitigations are appropriate, can be delivered, and would mitigate the impact of the growth. There will always be more detailed design works at planning application stage, but as in accordance with the PPG, the council considers it's proportionate at this stage. And I'll ask colleagues if there's anything which they wish to add. No, so I'm advised that there's nothing further they wish to add at this point.
Okay, Ms. Riley.
So Miss Riley's been having trouble with her audio. I've been trying to fix it, but I'm not sure what the problem is. She's logged in on audio, but doesn't have on video, but not any audio. I think she's trying to communicate to you by phone.
Yeah, because we've heard from Miss Riley, haven't we? We can see her.
Yeah.
I think the best thing to do is we'll probably take a break shortly anyway. So we'll have a break, and at that stage, it may be a case of maybe just logging out, turning things off, and on again, and trying to come back and see if it works, or if not, then using the tab.
She's just put a finger up.
Yeah, is that okay? Okay, we can come back to Ms. Riley if we'll try and get the technology away. So we'll probably take a break shortly, and come back. As I said, a lot of this detail we have discussed as well, but I think we're sort of going around in circles a little bit with it. So we'll move on. I want to look at obviously some of the policies, and this again goes back to the effectiveness of this strategy. So what does the council's policies actually seek to do then? So it's moving on to issue 2, which we'll move on to, and then we'll probably take us up to a break, and we can try and get Ms. Riley back at that stage. So we'll turn to policy T2, which is one of the main transport policies. And there I asked a question about this reference there to reasonably close proximity. So policy TP2 refers to things being in reasonably close proximity, and I asked the question, is that effective? Is it clear enough? And I think the council here suggested that you might think there needs to be a change to the policy here.
Good afternoon, Tom Vin, Planning Officer at Tunbridge Wells Borough Council. But yeah, essentially that's correct. So we're proposing to remove the reference to reasonably close proximity within criterion 1 of policy TP2. I think admittedly that was something that we meant to remove following the Regulation 18 consultation on the draft local plan. Following representations received, essentially saying that the reference to reasonably close proximity lacked clarity and was therefore inappropriate. But instead, within the supporting text of the policy, we refer to relevant highway guidance, including reference to the manual for streets guidance, as well as the Kent Design Guide and the emerging Kent Design Guide, which within it includes general target distances to public transport, which are desired for individual proposals. So in assessing relevant development proposals, using this policy, regard would be had to this design guidance when assessing the proposal.
So subject to this change then, so what would a development have to achieve then? So in terms of pedestrian access, public transport services, infrastructure, what would a development have to achieve? What are you requiring plan applications to demonstrate?
So generally in applying the guidance, we'd require that development proposals are generally in close proximity to public transport infrastructure. And so using the Kent Design Guidance as an example, I think it has a general target distance of 400 meters walking distance to bus stops within urban areas, but desirably no more than 250 meters. Whereas in rural areas, the walking distance is advised to be no more than 800 meters, and that directs pedestrian routes to bus stops that are convenient and as safe as possible. To encourage the use of public transport must also be provided. So that's what we'd generally seek in determining or in assessing a relevant development proposal. But of course, it would be considered on a case-by-case basis.
And in terms of the allocations then, is this a sort of criteria that you've looked at potential site allocations? Would the site allocations meet that requirement for sort of 400, 800 meters, etc.?
So I'll answer that question. So to go back to the site selection methodology day, a number of matters were looked at as part of the site selection, including assessment hierarchy, the proximity of the site to services and public transport, etc. There are some allocations which are other factors weighed heavily in terms of their allocation, particularly some of those which are very rural, and there's a couple that spring to mind, for example, Benenden Hospital and so on. So it's if felt necessary to clarify, policy TP2 could be potentially be adjusted to make clear that for development proposals, in addition to those set out as allocations in the local plan, will only be permitted if the following matters are following criteria are met.
Yeah, I think as far as TP2 is concerned, I think it's the phrase reasonably close proximity. It's too vague to be effective, I think. And obviously I think the council's aware of that. Problem is, if you go down the route of you don't want to sort of, and this is a common theme, you don't want to require something to accord with external guidance or SPD. So it needs to be a balance. But have a look. It's the sort of reasonably close proximity. You know, whether you refer to walking distances, and then you can cross-refer to guidance on what walking distances are. Because I think as part of this as well, it's not necessarily just about distance, and on a lot of the site allocations that we've talked about this week, there's sites being discussed where they don't necessarily have a footpath that runs alongside the site, and we've talked about footpaths going through to link up. So it's not always about distance. It's about ensuring that sites are accessible to public transport provision. And that's the end of it, really, isn't it? It could be distance, it could be physical features. Something might be really close to a bus stop or something like that, but it's crossing a dangerous busy road, which you wouldn't want to promote. So I think it's about the sort of wider considerations rather than just distance. Mr. Herbert.
Thanks. I think the discussion about sort of distances and other sort of recognised sort of measures in manual for streets, etc., is helpful. But I wonder if it is, as you alluded to there, it's about much more than just sort of distance. It's actually about quality and frequency of service. You may get an instance with a site coming forward that's in close proximity to a bus stop, but if that bus stop only has, one or two buses a day, then you're not going to get that mode shift to public transport. So perhaps there's a sort of a wider consideration, not just distance, but frequency and quality of service that needs to be applied here so that development does come forward in the most sustainable places.
Yeah, completely agree with that. I think that's part of it as well, isn't it? So yeah, it's the sort of site next door to a bus stop, but there's only one bus a week, then it's not achieving the sort of wider sort of aims and aspiration of the policy. Another part of this policy that I want to talk about was point 7, which is about changes to speed limits. It says, if appropriate, the developer will be required to investigate amending and fund any necessary amendment to external speed limits adjacent to sites. What's the justification for this, and do you think it's effective?
Thank you. Yeah, so within our hearing statement, I think we address the answer to that question within paragraph 9. So we consider that the funding for the necessary amendments to external speed limits as part of a development proposal is usually agreed during the planning application process. It's usual practice and often secured through Section 106 agreements, the costs of which are paid for by the developer. So I think fundamentally it's a clarification point is what the minor modification is, just to provide helpful clarification on what the council would generally expect. But of course, the policy wording also states, if appropriate, and as such, each proposal will be assessed on its own merits.
Okay, yeah, so potentially not something that's going to be applicable in every scenario. And again, there's a certain site last week, can't remember the reference off the top of my head, but again, this was something we were talking about in terms of speed limit changes, pedestrian footways, etc. So yeah, probably agree. It is a sort of site-specific issue rather than a sort of catch-all for every form of development. At the submission stage, there was some changes towards the end of this policy TP2. So it deleted criterion A, B, and C. You just talk to me about why you think that's necessary. So this is right at the end of policy TP2, transport and accessibility.
Yes, yeah, so I understand that relates to the section at the end of policy TP2 on shared space schemes. So that wording that is currently within the policy which we're proposing to remove, I understand was initially, or it was wording that was initially proposed by Kent County Council back in September 2018. So very early on within the formation of the development management policy, and I believe that was that wording was taken from another local authority, which Kent County Council, the wording of which wanted to adopt, and the ABC takes into account the fact that there was a national pause on shared space schemes from the Department for Transport. But I understand that the Department for Transport issued clarification notes after issuing that pause, stating which or where particular shared space schemes might be considered appropriate. So that's the origin of that wording. However, at the regulation 19 consultation, or I think but prior to the submission local plan being submitted, Kent County Council came back to us and suggested a further amendment to the wording to essentially remove reference to A, B, and C at the end of that policy, as essentially shared space schemes would be assessed individually and on their own merits by the local highways authority.
So again, just going back to what a developer would be required to provide, the wording would say shared space schemes which are regarded as suitable by Kent County Council will be considered as part of new residential schemes or within existing residential streets with very low levels of traffic. Again, it's almost sort of it's a statement rather than a policy requirement. So what are you requiring applicants to do? So the issues there where, raised junctions, speed tables, speed bumps, other traffic calming features, pedestrian crossings, etc., cul-de-sacs, what are you actually requiring a developer to do? Are you saying that shared space schemes should be considered as part of new residential schemes?
Sorry, sir. So I understand it would be up to the individual developer to whether or not they want to bring forward a shared space scheme, which so it's not a requirement within the policy as such, but I suppose it's more of an indication that any shared space scheme brought forward would need to be agreed with by the local highways authority.
I think the existing text that you had was probably more effective, but without A, B, and C. Shared space schemes where there is a level surface will be permitted. Where they apply to new residential areas or existing streets with very low levels of traffic, that gives more of an indication as to what will be permitted. I'm not sure as I follow why the change is necessary for soundness and what it's actually seeking to do. It's just more of a statement. So I think have a look at it. Probably falls into the category of are you trying to make policies better when the emphasis should be on soundness, really? Have a look at it. Is it going to be sound? Is it going to be effective? I'm not sure as I follow as to what the policy is actually seeking to do in that last bullet point.
So I think I agree with you. I don't think there's a need to take out that penultimate paragraph to which you've just referred. There is a need to take out A, B, and C. So the modification can be quite limited, in fact.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm back online now. If I could say what I was going to say.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. Perfect. Good timing. So we come to the end of that session, and then obviously, well, this part of the session. So before we move on, then we'll go back to it was Miss Riley, wasn't it?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about highways. I'm sorry, I've missed a big chunk of the discussion because I've been having trouble getting. I was locked out, so I don't know what happened there. What I wanted to say was they're talking about the borough are talking about mitigation, highways mitigation for the volume of development that's happening in Paddock Wood. The view of the town council is that the suggested mitigation is totally inadequate, A, for the volume of development, and B, in terms of the location of the mitigation. Kibbings Cross Roundabout is neither here nor there as far as the actual town of Paddock Wood is concerned. The difficulty with Paddock Wood is there is one north-south spine road, which is Maidstone Road, and the way that the development is being planned, everything is going to disgorge from a number of small lanes onto that Maidstone Road. The only other way out is up Gedges Hill, which is the B2160, which eventually leads through Matfield and Brenchley and up to Kibbings Cross. And as the people from Matfield have been saying, that is already causing a problem just with the construction traffic that's heading from Paddock Wood. The volume of development to the east of the town, we're looking in the region of probably, there's a site coming forward already, which is one of the allocated sites, where they're talking about 1,100 dwellings. There's also another site which they're not ready with their planning permission yet. That's another probably another 600-800 houses, plus the two new sites already, which is about I think that's about 700 dwellings which are currently under construction, and they all disgorge onto Church Road. Church Road is a lane that basically joins Paddock Wood in the middle of the town, junction of Station Road and Commercial Road, which is the High Street. And the only way then out of Paddock Wood is along Commercial Road, which is a congested High Street, and then back out onto Basil Road, or if it's going north, it has to dogleg right from Station Road onto the Maidstone Road over the railway bridge, which is just totally inadequate for the volume of traffic already. I mean, there's terrible congestion there most times of the day already. And with the volume of development that's been proposed for the east of the town council's view is there should always have been a road proposed from the east side of the town to the north, crossing the railway line to join either near Transfesa or to join up by the Hop Farm roundabout. The Colts Hill bypass is going to be a bypass. It also bypasses Paddock Wood, and I can't see how that's going to help with the volume of traffic that's going through Paddock Wood itself. And the other thing is the problems with the B2160 as it heads up from Paddock Wood up through Brenchley and Matfield is that, and towards the A21, is that it's also already being used a lot by the construction traffic. And with the volume of development that's happening, people are going to use that instead of the various other routes of getting out of Paddock Wood. Because what they'll do is they'll do the A21 and then up to Tunbridge instead of attempting to get out through Five Oak Green or up via the Hop Farm. And I just don't think, for the sheer quantity of development, these small mitigation measures, increasing capacity of roundabouts, there was discussion at the last Highways Matters meeting when we were talking about improving the roundabout between Crittenden Lane and Alders Road. And I actually had to look at a map to see where that was. And it's halfway up Colts Hill. It's nowhere near Paddock Wood. And I really don't see what relevance that has to either Toodley or Paddock Wood. It will just increase the volume on the two rat runs, which are Alders Road and Crittenden Lane. And I just don't think that I don't think this is being taken seriously enough. We're talking about huge allocations for Paddock Wood and Capel and Toodley. And I just don't think these small tinkering around the edges things and monitoring the traffic that's going on now, I just don't think it's not taking into account the existing developments. It's certainly not taking into account an additional sort of 4,000 for Paddock Wood and Paddock Wood Capel and another 1,500 or whatever it is for Toodley. I just don't think it's commensurate with the scale of development that's being proposed. And that's the view of the Town Council. And we are really upset. One of the initial drafts of the local plan had a suggestion of a road going from the east side of Paddock Wood north over the railway line up to the Hop Farm, and that's over various iterations has dropped out. But I just don't think this is being taken seriously. And the other issue that we have is that if all the highways funding from the development in Paddock Wood is, instead of being spent in the immediate area of Paddock Wood, is diverted towards a Colts Hill bypass, which is of no benefit to Paddock Wood, that seems very unfair because Paddock Wood and Capel are the areas that are getting all the aggravation, and the money would then go to Highways England for a project that they've had in planning between 20 and 40 years, depending on who you believe. And they probably should have funded that before rather than relying on the development in Paddock Wood to fund it now. And that's the view of the Town Council. And thanks for your patience in letting me speak now. And I'm sorry that I had my technical problems earlier. Thank you very much.
That's okay. Just get back to the council then. Just want to come back on any of the points that the Town Council's made there.
Very briefly, sir, the permitted schemes at Paddock Wood were factored into the modelling as well as the proposed growth. In terms of the other mitigations in and around Paddock Wood, they were looked at. There was the detailed master planning work which was undertaken between Regulation 18 and Regulation 19 stages, which looked specifically at that. And if you'd like further details, so we have the consultant here who can provide comment on that. Beyond that, so I think the responses that we've provided previously have cover the council's views in relation to how the highways modelling has been undertaken, how the mitigations have been assessed, and to take as an example the reference to the roundabout at Alders Road and Crittenden Lane. That is part of the the Colts Hill part bypass that we spoke about at length, a substantial piece of highways mitigation. That the roundabout is one element of that, and I think it's only right that the package of mitigation measures, including those physical alterations to the highways network, the targeted provision of new highways where necessary, but the overall, in addition, the mitigations around modal shift, so public transport and walking and cycling, need to be looked at in the round. Thank you.
Mr. Bowden.
Thank you, sir. Just a very quick point. I think if I heard correctly, Ms. Riley was suggesting that Colts Hill was a national highway scheme. It's a Kent County Council scheme, just for the record. Thank you.
Just finally on this issue, and I know that we discussed it at length on the Tudley and Paddock Wood, but I'm mindful that we've got the various colleagues from Kent County Council here at this session. One of the questions that I asked at the Tudley Village session, and I just want to be really sort of crystal clear on it. Part of the strategy for Paddock Wood and Tudley Village is the provision of the Courtsill bypass and then the provision of the Five Oak Green bypass. And we talked about the differences and we talked about how it would come forward, etc., etc. If the proposals come forward as expected and everything came forward as planned for those two strategic sites, what measures would the council seek to put in place, or what measures does the plan require sort of developers presumably to put in place to discourage or prevent or prohibit traffic moving through Five Oak Green? So obviously we've got the proposed school as part of Tudley Village on the one hand, and then you've got the sports hub at Paddock Wood on the other. What would stop vehicles just driving through Five Oak Green and not actually using the bypasses that have been proposed? How would that work in practice?
Thank you, sir. I will ask Mrs. Youngs and Mr. Brady to answer that point.
Thank you. Sorry, it took a little while to get on then. So just to confirm with Five Oak Green, within the infrastructure framework for the strategic sites, it's identified a sum of money for potential traffic calming through Five Oak Green to make it a low traffic neighbourhood. It's under traffic management of Five Oak Green, which could include, for example, a bus gate, so to prevent the traffic and to provide a more village type feel. And I think we touched upon on the Tudley Village Day, but just to reiterate, and we have colleagues from Kent County Council, because of the nature of the road at the moment as a B road, we wouldn't be able to implement those low traffic mitigations, which is a long-standing aspiration of Capel Parish Council. It's in their highways improvement plan, I believe is the term, and it's something that they would like to implement, but wouldn't be permitted at the moment. But as soon as Five Oak Green bypass is brought into use, the existing road through Five Oak Green could be downgraded, and then those local low traffic neighbourhood measures to make it more pedestrian friendly could be implemented, and that money would be secured through the development of Tudley Village.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Riley?
Yeah, sorry, I just want to say there isn't a single additional road proposed for Paddock Wood or the development donut that's going around it. There's not a single additional road proposed for Paddock Wood itself. And that's the point I'm trying to make. And also, as regards stopping the traffic going through Five Oak Green, traffic calming won't make it and won't stop people going through it because it's the most direct route to Tunbridge. It will simply mean that the traffic will be more congested as it goes through it and will potentially be more hazardous for pedestrians. But that's not my problem because I'm not here for Capel, I'm here for Paddock Wood Town Council. As I say, there isn't none of that mitigation. There is not a single additional road being proposed for Paddock Wood. There's just lots and lots of new estates which disgorge onto the already congested and very, very small road network in Paddock Wood, which was designed when it was a little village. And there have been no improvements in living memory to any of the road network, and none of these suggestions make a blind bit of difference to Paddock Wood, and none of them will mitigate for the scale of the development that's happening. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a break and then we'll come back to look at some of the sort of detailed policies, parking standards. We've got policies on, so we'll come back to look at that, and then we've got issue 4 which is around safeguarded infrastructure. So we should get through that in good time. Okay, so I propose we'll take a break then. Should we take a 15-minute break? Is that okay for everybody until 25 to? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Okay, thank you, everybody. It's 25 to, so we'll resume and continue. Next issue to go through within the matters, issues and questions document I want to look at is relating to car parking standards. So we can probably take questions 4 and 5 together, really, which was asking whether or not the standards are justified based on appropriate local evidence, and whether or not they're justified. And the council set out various sources of evidence within their hearing statement, which relates to the various different zones and how the council has come about to reach these standards. One question I did have, and then I'll sort of open it up for discussion, really, within the policies. This is policy TP3. There's sort of 2 issues that I want to go through. The first is in relation to maximum car parking standards, which I think you've suggested or agreed that there's a change needed in relation to the reference to maximum car parking standards here. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. In relation to the non-residential and C2 parking standards.
Yeah. So let's just bring up the policy and have a quick look at that then. So in terms of the residential car parking standards, so they're all minimum standards then, are they?
So within policy TP3, we've got essentially 3 separate zones, to which there are 3 separate parking standards. So within Zone A, which is Royal Tunbridge Wells Town Centre parking area, we've got a mandatory parking standard unless a lower provision can be justified. And then we've got a Zone B, which is inside the limits to built development of Royal Tunbridge Wells, excluding the town centre, within Zone A, Southborough, Rustall, Pembury, Paddock Wood, Cranbrook and Hawkhurst. And then we've got Zone C, which is also minimum parking standards, albeit slightly higher than the standards within Zone B, which relates essentially to everywhere else in the borough, which are predominantly rural locations.
So what do you mean by it's mandatory then? See, minimum, presumably, so we're in Zone B, and you've got a 1-bed flat, so they have to provide at least a minimum of 1 parking space. So presumably they could provide more then, could they? If they wanted to, if that development wanted to?
In minimum, so within Zone B and Zone C, a slightly higher proposed parking provision could be permitted if it goes beyond the minimum standard. I know I think some of the made neighbourhood development plan areas, for example, Gowthurst, I think they've got an even higher standard that has been adopted, I think, which equates to 1 bedroom, 1 parking space per bedroom per dwelling. So I think sort of particularly within the rural areas, it could be justified. But in terms of the mandatory parking provision, that's essentially the default parking standard that the council would seek to achieve unless a lower provision could be justified.
So what's it's all semantics in some regard, but it's important. So what's the difference between mandatory and minimum?
So with the minimum parking standards, that would be the minimum that we would require. So a higher provision could be provided if the developer sought to justify that. With mandatory, we've sought to sort of achieve a balance, so we don't want to under provide parking provision within the town centre area within Royal Tunbridge Wells, predominantly due to existing on-street car parking issues, which I think has largely resulted from the council having adopted Kent County Council's maximum parking standards of 1 space per dwelling. and that's obviously had impacts on sort of congestion and access for emergency vehicles in and around the town centre in Royal Tunbridge Wells. But at the same time, we don't want to over provide parking provision with a minimum parking standard, given that Royal Tunbridge Wells town centre is the most accessible location within the borough in terms of access to public transport and also sort of pedestrian access to local services and amenities.
So by referring to it as mandatory, do you not think that you are, in essence, continuing then to set the maximum car parking standard? And therefore potentially sort of, you said that this has caused problems in the past. Do you not think that this will just continue a similar sort of trend? If you have to, you have to provide that.
So with mandatory, that would be the default standard that we would require. So we wouldn't, so it wouldn't have the same function as a maximum standard unless the developer could extensively justify that through the submission of a planning application. So our position with any proposal that would come forward within the town centre would be to provide those mandatory parking standards, and they reflect local average car and van ownership levels that the council has determined within its residential parking standards topic paper, which is the main evidence base behind this policy. And so in providing these mandatory parking standards, the council considers that would, at the very minimum, not exacerbate existing on-street car parking issues.
And sort of same question on the other way around, really. Why not just refer to them as minimum?
So I think with minimum parking standards, where I suppose it's a case of trying to achieve a balance with the policy. So the Royal Tunbridge Wells town centre is, as I said, the most accessible location in the borough. So it's the location within the borough that generally has the lowest average car and van ownership levels in relation to the rest of the borough. And so we're keen not to over provide and to also, of course, encourage active modes of transport within the central Tunbridge Wells town centre locations. So we don't want to over provide within the Royal Tunbridge Wells town centre area, which a minimum parking standard could potentially cause. And of course, we've got other policies within the local plan which might be in conflict with a minimum parking standard. For example, making effective use of brownfield lands, which would be policy SDR3. So the council considers that on balance, a mandatory parking standard, unless a low provision can be justified, is the most appropriate for the town centre.
Okay, so table 14 sets out the residential parking standards. You've got your 3 zones. Where you've got something like 1.5, what are you expecting there? Is it would just be a residential development come forward and sort of average it out? How would what would a developer do where you've got your sort of your 1.5?
So I think it would essentially be averaged out sort of through a mix of allocated and non-allocated parking provision. And I think it's worth mentioning that the parking standards sort of broadly align with Kent County Council's emerging residential parking standards, where I understand it's sort of a similar level. So for some particular dwellings, it's 0.5 provision, which I understand would essentially be averaged out across the development.
Okay, so that sets out your table for residential parking standards. For non-residential parking standards, says any proposals for non-residential development shall apply the maximum parking standards in accordance with Kent County Council's latest guidance as appropriate. I think again this goes back to development plan documents, referencing sort of separate standalone supplementary guidance. Really, the development plan can't give development plan status to a document that sits outside it. So if you've got a county council guidance or a supplementary planning guidance, I know we talked a lot about this for the SPDs and the strategic sites, it can't sort of give development plan status to those documents. So how would you propose changing the policy then for non-residential schemes?
So I think so within our hearing statement for question 6, we've essentially stated that the maximum that the parking standards for non-residential developments as well as CC developments would be in accordance with the latest KCC guidance, and as a minor mod we're proposing to remove reference to maximum parking standards which are currently proposed within the Emerging Kent Design Guide, conceding that as the Kent Design Guide is yet to be finalised and adopted, the maximum standards, of course, might not meet the compelling justification test of the MPPF. The council has historically and currently uses the or refers to the parking standards for non-residential developments that KCC adopted back in 2006, which I think is SPG 4, which we did remove reference to, and it's generally considered a suitable approach to continue to refer to Kent County Council's guidance. But of course, each proposal that comes forward would naturally be assessed on its own merits. So within different sort of use classes and within individual use classes, there might be a separate or a different level of parking provision required, depending on, for instance, a company within or different companies within similar use classes and so on. So I think in large part it would be assessed if a proposal for a non-residential development came forward, it would be assessed on its own merits.
Okay, when looking at this wording, I think yes, you need to obviously to support the change to delete the reference to the sort of maximum standards under the C2, but you also need to look more generally at this requirement that something has to accord with Kent County Council's latest guidance, because the policy can't give that status to a separate guidance document, especially one that's not been produced yet. So have a look at the wording, and as I say, it needs to come up with something that's can have regard to the guidance. You can take it into account. You just can't require strict accordance with it within that policy. The second, that was the sort of the first part about this policy. The second part of the policy is where the strategic sites are concerned, and this comes under, I think it's called exceptional circumstances heading, which is lower down in the policy. So in terms of the strategic sites, then what do you require of the strategic sites that's different?
So I'll take this if I may. The requirement for the strategic sites is to, so far as possible, reduce the reliance upon the use of the motor car or the car. And the ambition is to bring it below minimum Zone C standards, is my understanding, so far as that might be possible. You will see that contrary to the view which you have taken to date about the use of supplementary planning documents and any requirements they may have, that paragraph 1 under that section of the policy talks about allowing proposals to depart from vehicular parking standards where there is a bespoke parking standard included as part of a site-specific supplementary planning document. The strategic policies, when or if they're modified, will include a provision within them, not by reference to supplementary planning document, but a requirement of the policy itself, for the proposals to include a parking strategy that promotes parking space provision below the minimum for Zone C, where possible and practicable, and to promote alternative means of promote the use of alternative means of transport and reduce reliance upon the use of the car. So the policy requirement to be there. So policy paragraph number 1, paragraph 1 would say a bespoke parking standard is included as part of a site-specific policy requirement, including in those to be determined by a master planning approach or made in the neighborhood plan, etc. So it will include all of those, but we're proposing a specific policy requirement for a parking strategy to be included in an application for planning permission, which looks to provide parking below that minimum standard where possible and practicable.
I understand the council's rationale for doing that. But do you think there's a risk that in doing that, you essentially fall into the same trap as applying maximum parking standards? You're essentially saying what your evidence has showed. So you've done some evidence, and that says that typically people living in the more rural parts of the borough have a higher car ownership. They don't benefit from the same accessibility as maybe residents in Royal Tunbridge Wells. And is there a risk then that in doing that, you then inadvertently just end up in the same situation as you would do by setting maximum parking standards, i.e. this whole concept of, well, we're going to restrict people from having places to park their vehicles, which will mean that they will all jump on the bus and cycle everywhere and walk everywhere. When actually your evidence says the opposite. Your evidence says, well, if you live in a rural area, sort of because you don't benefit from the same accessibility, you will have a higher level of car ownership.
Yes, so that would apply to rural areas, but here we're talking about the strategic allocations, which are meant to be self-sufficient and sustainable in a sense that it's intended that they be well served by public transport and other modes of access to vital infrastructure and day-to-day and for day-to-day needs. So I certainly wouldn't be suggesting that approach be adopted for rural settlements and proposed allocations in the rural area, which, as the MPPF recognises, may not always be well served by public transport. But certainly for the purposes of the strategic allocations, the two strategic allocations, we see that as a legitimate objective, but it's something which will need to be considered at the time the application is made by reference to the evidence which is presented at the time. So if you like, the policy requirement is an ambition and it's a laudable one. If it can be met, all well and good, but if it can't, then it can't. Then the standards Zone C standards would apply in those circumstances. So it does import some flexibility. It provides an opportunity for the council to influence the extent to which these strategic allocations ought to limit the number of cars allowed to be parked on the allocated site, but subject to evidence at the time. So it imports flexibility, but also gives some effect to the possibility that these developments can be, as it were, setting new standards.
Okay. Yeah, obviously the first paragraph refers to may allow proposals to depart, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's take some views on what we've heard thus far then from anybody who's made any representations about parking standards. Anybody want to make any points at this stage? Yeah, Ms. Borland.
Thank you, sir. CPRE takes the view that actually, it is reasonable to accept that there's going to be more car ownership for the moment in the rural areas, but rather than just accepting that going forward and saying, well, it's going to continue to dominate in the villages and rural communities, wouldn't it be better to actually put some emphasis on getting the sort of useful public transport that we're talking about for strategic sites out to the villages to reduce their need for cars? A comprehensive bus network would actually, across the borough, would actually help an awful lot in reducing car usage. And it would also save some of the vast amounts of land currently that has to be used to provide parking spaces. And we have the same view on cycling, that active travel could be a possibility. There was a mention earlier about interurban active travel. I don't think there's any interurban travel direct from Paddock Wood to Royal Tunbridge Wells within the plan. And for the villages in between, well, we are continually saying that it should be, if you're going to compulsory purchase land, if you're happy to compulsory purchase land to build new roads, why isn't there compulsory purchase suggested for building off-road cycleways to make it safe for people to travel from the villages to the centres that they wish to do? Even for children to travel to the schools, some of which have dreadfully long journeys these days. So really, I guess we're very much, we should be thinking of the future and trying to find ways of minimising car usage, rather than just saying, oh, well, in the strategic sites, because they're new, we'll cut down the parking and we'll force them to use all the transport that's going to be provided. Let's think about the other areas as well and try and make something practical that could work for them to help cut down car uses across the whole borough. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments on this? I was just looking for where the plan would pick up on issues such as electric vehicle charging points, sometimes within sort of car parking standard policies. I was just looking at the design policies. That then within one of the design policies, perhaps?
Yes. So policy TP2, so transport design and accessibility, has a reference to electric vehicle charging points in criterion 9. So development proposals will only be permitted provided that suitable provision is made for electric vehicle charging points or any new technology requirements, and the developer would be required to refer to the minimum standards that we've set out within our electric vehicle charging points guidance note.
Yeah, I think EN1 there's reference to it as well, isn't there? It's also in the strategy for all Tunbridge Wells. Expansion of electric vehicle charging points, car club. Yeah. Within TP3, there is a lot of detail, and a lot of specific requirements. Do you think that's effective? Do you think it's about right? Do you think it potentially goes a bit too far? How is this going to work? It's obviously very, very prescriptive in terms of its detail. Things being 2.7 meters and 2.6 meters wide, etc. Is this something that the council has it used before within its development plan? Do you think it's going to be effective?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I was just going to say that the feedback we've had from officers who have to deal with parking, particularly at the development management stage, is that very often you do need these kinds of policy hitches on which to be able to base your requirements. But having said that, there might be scope for reducing the length of the policy in order to make it more intelligible for the lay person who may come upon this and want to understand what the requirements are, and to simplify its requirements, to make it more effective and usable as a development management tool. Don't know, I interrupted. Did you want to say anything more? No, that's fine. So let us give consideration to that and see if we can both simplify it and also reduce some of the requirements to make it more workable.
We talked the other day about removal of PD rights as well. And I think there was reference in here within this policy, again, sort of saying that the council will remove PD rights on things, permitted development rights. So again, just have a look at that.
Yeah, it says car barns will also only be considered when they are open on 3 sides, and permitted development rights will be removed to prevent subsequent alteration. Yeah. Okay, that's noted, sir. Thank you.
Any other comments then on parking standards from anybody? TP3, what we've heard? No. TP4 was about public car parks and essentially sort of retaining public car parks. Again, I didn't have any specific questions on this. I know that in council's hearing statement obviously refers to obviously impacts of COVID, changing use of public car parks, etc., etc. Presumably, as part of the Sheila work, did the council look at any of its car parks to sort of, again, we talked about residential development, haven't we, and maximising the use of brownfield sites? Is this something that the council did either through its sort of planning team or sort of other departments within the council? Did it look at rationalising car parks and reusing sites?
I'm just taking some instructions, sir. Bear with me. Sorry for the delay, sir. All of the council's assets were looked at in terms of their development potential and capacity. None of the car parks which were looked at were thought worthy of bringing forward for alternative development, including housing.
So if I could add that the council's car parks, particularly in Royal Tunbridge Wells, but elsewhere across the borough, have been subject historically to high levels of use, and the difficulties around car parking have been frequently mentioned as an issue in relation to the town centre, and I believe from memory it's referenced in the Nexus report. Now, since COVID, there has been a change in car park use, that the usage obviously drops during that period of time, but we're now seeing a strong return to that. So again, particularly given the timings of the submission of the local plan, we're in that, or at that time, it was in that period before there was a return to normal, if you like.
Yeah, so presumably it's something that obviously, so still sort of moving out of the COVID, and who knows what will happen in the future, but presumably it's something the council can review at the 5-yearly stage anyway. And if things have changed, obviously we've heard about the Royal Tunbridge Wells sort of area action plan or local plan, so potentially scope to look at potential sites through that as well. Any comments, and again from anyone who's made reps on TP4, which is regarding car parks? See, pretty sort of standard requirements there. If a car park does come forward for redevelopment, usual sort of thing: assessments, identify whether it's still necessary, etc., etc. Last issue then, safeguarded infrastructure. So there's 3 questions, but also 2 issues really. The first is around Colts Hill, and we talked obviously at length on the Paddock Wood Day and the Cheetah Village Day about the sort of the online route and the offline route, and the sort of the partial route, etc., etc. So the route for the entirely offline scheme then. So if we go back to that day, I think the council said that that's not necessary to mitigate the effects of the development of the plan, but it is nonetheless shown as a safeguarded route. This is the entirely offline scheme where it sort of continues. If it's not needed, obviously the obvious question is, if it's not needed to mitigate the transport impacts of the plan, why is it shown as a safeguarded route?
So if I could deal with the A228 safeguarded route in 2 sections, and then sort of provide some comments on the second section, and to address your question in particular. So the first section running, so here we're running from Pembury northwards, northeastwards towards Paddock Wood. So that the first section, which leaves the A228 from the point where there's the extra running lane at Pembury towards essentially the Alders Road location. So that is not required to mitigate the growth proposed in the local plan. However, and as we set out in the hearing statements, the fully offline A228 Colts Hill bypass is part of the Kent County Council's local transport plan. It has been identified as being an important element of the overall major road network, providing a route towards North Kent. The Lower Thames crossing is within that vicinity as well, and the potential economic benefits, for example, that could be derived from improved highways, a highway link through that location, but it is not required to mitigate the impact of growth. So if we then move on to the second half, if you like, from Alders Road onwards to towards Paddock Wood and the Badsall Road roundabouts. So that section is of the existing route would not be required to be safeguarded because in order to mitigate the growth from Paddock Wood and Chudley, Paddock Wood in particular, there is the link which runs around from the Badsall Road to the north of the existing dwellings on the A228 before linking up with the roundabout, which we mentioned earlier today, at the junction of the A228 Alders Road and Christendom Road. So the council believes that there is it's appropriate to safeguard the second half. I've talked about it as the first half of the route, if you like, from Pembury to Alders Road, but not the second half. However, conscious that the proposals map shows the entire safeguarded route, so that would need to be a modification to address that difference.
And in terms of the sort of first half, as you referred to it then. So what's the likelihood of the sort of the first half of that route, as this is down obviously near Pembury? What's the likelihood of that being delivered then? And who would deliver it?
So that would be delivered by Kent County Council. The likelihood of that being delivered is, and I'm sure colleagues from the county will add to whatever I say if they feel necessary, will essentially be dependent upon external funding. It is not, as I said, it's not required to mitigate the growth identified in through this local plan. Again, can't say what will happen in terms of future growth through future development plan production, but in terms of it being delivered otherwise, it would require external funding to do so. However, there is support for the A228. It remains in the County Council's transport plan. Specific reference is made to that, and given that the Borough Council's local planning authority considered it appropriate to safeguard it, if in due course the county were to not consider that it was an important element of the major road network and were to remove it from or to not carry it forward in their next local transport plan, which as we've heard earlier is currently being undertaken, work on that, then the council would at the 5-year review period would look at that again.
But is there any likelihood of this coming forward within the plan period? So I know that it's, reference have been sort of made to these various schemes in the past, various sessions throughout this examination. Is there any likelihood at all that this, given it needs external funding, is there any possibility that this is going to keep coming forward?
Yes, so there is some, I believe, subject to appropriate funding being secured. And I know that is a very big subject too, but periodically, and we've seen it over recent years, funding becoming available from governments. The plan period is, a lot can change in that period. If their funding were to be available, it is my understanding, and again, I can ask county colleagues to corroborate this, that there is a willingness from the Highways Authority to seek to take that forward. It's part of their plan, particularly if the works to the section which have been which is required to mitigate the growth, if it can be tied in with that in terms of timing and in terms of the process for actually delivering that. We understand that the work which has been undertaken already around the link which is required for the to mitigate the growth could tie in with the safeguarded element from the Alders Road to Pembury. Those designs have been looked at and have been developed in such a way that if and subject to that funding being available, it could be the two sections could tie into one another to deliver the wholly offline route.
And is this then referred to within the policy itself? You referred to some potential mapping changes, but is it then specified within a policy? So look, TB5 is about the safeguarded railway land, obviously the hot pickers, etc. Safeguarding roads, TP6, isn't it?
TP6 it is, yeah.
So is this where you refer to the entirely offline A228 strategic link then?
Yes, it's the second part of the policy. And I suppose the heights it's put actually is in paragraph 6.580 in the supporting text.
Yeah. Okay, any comments on this safeguarded route then from anybody? So it is within the plan, it's under policy TP6. Obviously, we've talked to the we talked about the sort of Colts Hill bypass and improvements in the context of Paddock Wood, but just in terms of the wider safeguarding of the route, any comments from anybody? Nope. The second part of this is around the A21 Kippings Cross to Lamberhurst improvements then. So again, what are those improvements and why are they sort of identified and safeguarded on the policies map there?
Sorry, sir. So the A21 has been subject to considerable works over the previous decade to dual down towards Kippings Cross, which we mentioned earlier. National highways have identified a route which runs from Kippings Cross towards what's often referred to as the Lamberhurst or Horseman Den roundabout. Again, it is identified in the in relevant documentation, including the Kent County Council transport plan, albeit is part of the strategic road network. and so you will have seen the submission by National Highways in relation to this route, and their comments about its deliverability, given that it is an identified issue, whilst the delivery of it is not required to mitigate growth through the local plan. It's considered appropriate to safeguard the preferred route in order to allow its realisation in due course. And I see Mr. Bown, who from National Highways has put his hand up, so perhaps it would be appropriate to pass across at this point.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Mr. Bown.
Thank you. Yes, we wrote to you by letter dated the 14th of June, and that's in the record. And I can take any questions that anyone has on that. Just by way of an update, I'm not sure whether the examination is aware that Transport for the South East are now consulting on their strategic investment plan until the 12th of September. So Transport of the South East are a national sub-regional transport body with various constituent bodies, including local highway authorities, local authorities, national highways, etc. Included in the strategic case that they are consulting on with a view to putting to government by way of a bid for either government funding, direct funding or indirect funding, it does include upgrades to the A21, including around Lamberhurst. So in addition to the text that we included in our letter, saying that obviously various governments over the years have had schemes, and it wasn't for the want of wanting the dualling to occur. It was obviously a case of a government spending review at the time, resulting in hard decisions having to be made, which included the dropping of the previous scheme. So the aspiration still exists at government, national highways, and certainly local level. I suspect you will have heard from the A21 reference group, who have long campaigned for the dualling of the A21 from London to Hastings. So it's definitely still on our radar. And whilst I accept and I hear from others that the dualling is not required for this plan, it's a case of decisions could be made during the life of the plan that could lead to that dualling. We have no schemes at the moment, but during the lifetime of the plan, we are going to see at least 3 road investment strategy periods, and clearly governments will make decisions at each stage based on, you know, national and local interests in terms of what schemes come forward for progress through study, through implementation, etc. So in terms of likelihood, I can't sit here and say it's 100%, but equally I wouldn't say it was 0%. Thank you, sir.
In terms of the identification of this route, it's not on any of the inset maps, is it? Is it on the wider map, I believe?
I'd leave this to my Tunbridge Wells colleagues for the detail of how they are showing it safeguarded. I mean, obviously, traditionally we would have issued a map showing the area to be safeguarded. In 2011, we wrote to them saying that they no longer needed to safeguard it, but obviously it's within their gift to continue to do so. I am guessing it's still on that alignment, but they'll be able to confirm.
Yes, probably the best place to look is the interactive policies map.
So it just follows the, effectively it just follows the existing alignment then, does it? There's no other there's no other part to it. Like I say, it's just follows the alignment of the existing road, presumably. So
yes, I think the scheme that was being promoted at that time was an online scheme, and obviously we would be required to optioneer to look at all potential online and offline schemes. As I say, from our perspective, we're not requiring the local authority to safeguard it, but on the other hand, it can be quite helpful to show potential routes for people who might wish to buy locally, etc. They know that something may happen here. Now, obviously, a discussion around the implications of that for owners is another matter, and I can understand both the fors and against doing so. But certainly in the past, local authorities given an indication of where something may happen, it has been generally felt to be helpful.
Actually, I don't think it does follow exactly the line of the existing route, does it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think it was generally seen as an online scheme, but that may have elements of offline. It would depend on obviously the topography, what other development is in the area, whether a general route might also include a bypass of a village, etc. So if something is described as online, it's because generally it is. If it's described as offline, it's because generally it is, but it's not exclusively one or the other.
So you can see that the existing A21 snakes rather through this section, and then the preferred alignment, which reflects that indicated previously, is that straighter route shown in the sort of lilac, light purple colour. And as Mr. Bowen said, it's I think there's two elements. One is future purchasers of properties and land. The other is the planning applications, obviously, which come forward, so that the council can have consider applications against a safeguarded policy to, and if necessary, will refuse consent for something which would potentially jeopardise the delivery of that route in due course.
On the existing policies map, what alignment shown is it? Is it the same as a continuation of the existing? Presumably it is, if it's based on what previously done.
I'll have to. So we will double check that.
Yeah.
I'm terribly sorry. I have to leave now, so I will pass across to colleagues to pick up. I'm really sorry to have to dash.
So it's one of the points I raised not long ago, and it's something which we're going to need to check out and make sure the alignment which is shown on the map is correct. We can't be safeguarding a route that's not correct. So we will check that out with Mr. Bowen and his colleagues to make absolutely sure that should you find it appropriate to include the safeguarding policy, that you can be assured the route is the correct one. And that would need to include, I would expect, within reason, some limits of deviation to take account of local circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. Just double check that the route is correct. Obviously, if these things have been shown before, then presumably it's a continuation of the existing, but worthwhile.
We just need to make sure.
It's a very, a very short note to the programme officer would Would be helpful just to clarify that, please.
We'll see to that. Thank you, sir.
Okay, any other, the other questions I had for today then? Any other representations, comments anybody would like to make? So
not from us, thank you.
Highways more generally. Yeah, go to Charlie Keeling.
Thank you, sir. Just wanted to recap on a couple of points before we close. So earlier this afternoon, Mrs. Young was talking about the downgrading of the B2017 as being part of the Capel Parish Council plan. Actually, Capel, I've been looking at the minutes, and Capel Parish Council's consultants recommended several years ago regarding overall road safety that it ought to be downgraded, and it was never suggested that bus gates or a bypass would achieve this. So I just wanted to put that on record, please. And secondly, back to the bypass, if I may. I think in a previous session you may have heard that one of the advantages of the Five Oak Green bypass would be regarding flood mitigation for Five Oak Green, because it would be possible to create pools, ponds, tanks, whatever, if that land was owned by the council. As I mentioned earlier, I believe one of the two landowners is pursuing an alternative plan. Okay, that's up in the air for the moment. But the environmental impact of the compulsory purchase orders, we've seen nothing, sorry, of the potential compulsory purchase orders, we've seen nothing about that. So I just wanted to make those couple of points, and it was in response really to Ms. Riley from Paddock Wood Town Council's observation, which was a very astute one actually. Why would people use the Five Oak Green bypass when there's the rat run through Five Oak Green on the B2017? I think that's a very relevant point. So thank you, sir. That's all I had to say.
Thank you very much. Mr. Avin-Reinos, please. You've got your hand up, Mr. Avin-Reinos. I think I've pronounced your surname correctly. You can hear me. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Right. I wanted to say that I've read the statement of common ground between Tunbridge Wells and Kent County Council, and it refers to the modelling of junctions and capacity in the latest and their latest submission, which is very recent. But I would like to know, when the modelling of the A26 corridor through from Tunbridge Wells and Southborough, was that modelled using the new cycle proposal for the A26 corridor? And if it was, which of the four alternatives shown in the report published by PJA was used in the modelling? Thank you.
Okay, one for the council there.
I'll be with you in a second, sir. Sorry.
Apologies, sir. That specific scheme wasn't directly modelled, but the parallel schemes coming forward within the LC WIP were considered as part of the model. Those are not specific local plan schemes, but they support the LC WIP schemes support the move to sustainable transport. So specific schemes weren't modelled directly within the strategic model, but the impacts of their implementation was factored in relation to accounting for mode shift.
But hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good. So the agreement between Kent County Council and Tunbridge Wells, as reported in this statement of common ground, was not based on any specific modelling of the junctions on London Road and the road through Southborough, which is a section of the road which apparently absolutely requires reduction of no increase of traffic due to from the development. I mean, it's actually stated in the report that it has to be amelioration rather than providing more capacity.
Yeah, just to confirm, the A26 corridor, so the corridor into Tonbridge Town Centre, was included within the model. I think it's reflective of the nature of that corridor and the current issues that it suffers with regards congestion, which is an underlying issue. And in recognition of the constraint nature of the network as well, it's not the local plan ambition to provide additional transport traffic capacity. It's slightly counterintuitive to encouraging sustainable transport modal shift, because if we provide wholesale additional traffic capacity, then all that will do is encourage people to continue to use their cars. So what the local plan transport strategy does is it includes a comprehensive package of sustainable transport measures, of which along that corridor, buses and cycles through the LC WIP and the BSIP work that's being undertaken in parallel to the local plan. The modal shift that such measures will result in is the mitigation along that corridor.
But that hasn't been modelled, how that works through the junctions.
No, it has, in that the local plan scenarios assessed includes a modal shift. So the model has considered the A26 in its current footprint, and that the impacts of the local plan will be mitigated by a reduction in traffic as a result of the significant investment in sustainable travel along that corridor.
But as I look at well, there are 4 proposals, so nothing's yet decided on what scheme you're planning to go for. But as I look at them, it seems that they're going to reduce the capacity of the road rather than, which perhaps encouraging some active travel, but the likelihood of holdups at the junctions seems to me likely to be much increased. But I mean, I may be wrong, and that should be modelled.
But I'm just going to pass across to my colleagues from Tunbridge Wells.
Hello, I'm Hilary Smith from Tunbridge Wells Borough Council. I just wanted to highlight the work that was done as part of the LCWIT Phase 2, which PJA, who are expert designers of active travel schemes, have prepared a concept design for a sustainable transport corridor along the A26 between Royal Tunbridge Wells Town Centre and our boundary with our neighbours in Tunbridge. And it provides improved access via a segregated cycle lane and also improvements for pedestrians and for bus users as well along that road. Now, that scheme isn't committed, but in its present form, but what it shows is that it's feasible to provide a greatly upgraded active travel corridor along the A26. That it's feasible, and a cost for that is included within the IDP as well. So that specific scheme, so what Ms. Parsons was trying to say is that specific scheme wasn't modelled, but a modal shift allowance was modelled, and this scheme shows that that modal shift could be delivered via a much improved active travel corridor along the A26.
But there's no modelling of that. I mean, you're taking somebody's word that this will reduce will maintain the existing traffic flow.
I think, as I said, the work that PJA have done shows that it's feasible to deliver with the appropriate funding, to deliver a much upgraded cycle route there. And they're, as I say, they're very experienced, and the type of scheme they've proposed, is working in other locations within the UK and could deliver a significant modal shift. But there are 4 proposals, and they've got 4 possible layouts. I'm not entirely clear what layouts. I have to admit, I'm not entirely clear. There's a route for the length of the A26. On one side, cycle routes on the other side. Cycle routes at the same level as the pavement, cycle routes at the same level as the road. I think
what document is that? Sorry.
I think the plan is Appendix H of the LCWIT Phase 2. Yes. I think maybe that at the start of on the first page of the plan, there's alternative arrangements, but there is actually a proposed segregated route within those plans in Appendix H. I think there might be a little bit of a misunderstanding because of that first. They present some drawings on the first page of that.
No, yeah, I appreciate the point that's been made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other comments, questions then? No. Okay, well, thank you all for your time. Apologies that we had to run over slightly at the start of this session just to go through the last allocation from this morning's session, but we still got done. So thank you for that, and thank you for sticking with that. Which means we then didn't have to use a reserve day. So thank you for the suggestion, and to the 2 participants who hung on. I think probably already left, but apologies to them as well. Anything from the council then before we adjourn for the evening?
No, thank you very much, sir. Not tonight.
No, thank you all very much. So back tomorrow then for those attending. Slightly earlier start tomorrow. It's 9:30 start, and obviously separate logins for tomorrow's session. So we'll adjourn for the day and see you tomorrow. Thank you.